Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you, Mary. Mary McDonald and Larry have made my stay here most enjoyable by picking me up at the airport, filling me with Thai food and regular food and good company over the last, I guess, day and a half, and it's been wonderful. You may have heard when Larry introduced me that I have a title that's called the Reverend Canon Sally Bingham. A lot of people don't know what canon is, and quite honestly, it has little meaning in today's world. It was an old Anglican term that was used for people who lived on the close and were part of a cathedral, and they still use it in the Episcopal Church if you work at a cathedral. My canon title was given to me as an honorary canon, and it happened when our new bishop came in about 3 years ago, and I believe that he made me canon for the environment for the Diocese of California, largely because he couldn't keep me quiet. And I am now known around the diocese as the loose canon. And it's been great fun. I'm not shy of that title. I try to speak the truth, and I will even speak the truth that I believe is the truth, even when it's hard for people to hear. We are living at a very difficult time in history. And at the same time, it's a very exciting moment to be alive. Things around us are changing very fast, not the least of which, as you all know, is happening in the Middle East. And many people say that the revolution that happened in Tunisia and in Egypt would not have been so successful without the aid of social networking. It has changed our lives. We are having to create new norms for a new reality. But in the meantime, we're dealing with economic recession, terrorism, severe environmental degradation all over the world, along with the increasingly scary signs of runaway global climate change. And climate change is complicated. It's an issue that invokes feelings of loss, hardship, unfairness, and certainly confusion. And those feelings are real, just as the climate crisis is real. And it sounds scary, but we're also at a moment of rare opportunity. There's something bigger than feelings of fear and bigger than the climate crisis. We have a chance to come together with a shared purpose. And this is something that few generations have had the chance to do. While crisis means danger, it's also an opportunity to work together. It's a chance to redefine the human purpose. Why did God put us here in the first place? And what is our purpose? And might we consider coming together with the purpose of healing the earth so that we and the next generations may live in good health and safety? Could that be our shared purpose? But back to the climate for a moment. By accepting that the changing climate is going to affect all of us, we accept a shared responsibility to do something to save ourselves from ourselves. And what we need is a cultural shift in the way we think about, create, and use energy. But the challenges that we face in order to make the necessary changes are huge. And just for example, there was a coal mine explosion last year that took the lives of 29 people. And coal is the most dangerous and dirty of the fossil fuels that we're using. Besides mining through tunnels, coal is extracted by blowing the tops off mountains. Not only does that destroy the entire ecosystem in the vicinity, I think it's a sin against creation and an insult to God. 11 men lost their lives in an oil rig explosion, causing the worst oil disaster in the history of this country in the Gulf of Mexico. Last year, just about this time. And while that was happening, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, which is NOAA, announced that the planet has just come through the warmest decade, the warmest year, and the warmest last 6 months. And still, our elected officials in Washington utterly failed to pass any energy, climate change, or even oil spill response legislation. And this is what we are up against. They have rejected climate science, calling global warming a hoax, and they are standing behind a well-funded misinformation campaign paid for by the oil, coal, and gas industry. I think this is corrupt. And I'm going to make a serious charge. I take a risk doing it, but I think that these legislators are committing crimes against humanity. Many senators have done their own studies on climate, and they've made public statements that the science is in fact conclusive, that it's overwhelmingly evident that humans are making the biggest contribution to the problem by burning fossil fuels for energy. And they know too that climate change is already harming thousands of people all over the world. And yet, even those elected officials that know what a serious and urgent problem it is will not vote for legislation that would curb greenhouse gas emissions. And isn't that a crime when it's harming others and the future? So I ask you the question, where is the moral integrity of our elected officials? And how can they put re-election ahead of what's best for this country, what's best for the American people, and best for the poor and vulnerable around the world, not to mention the preservation of the planet? And there is no doubt that every form of energy has risks, but we do not and we should not take the kind of risk that BP Oil Company, Halliburton, and Deepwater Horizon did in the southern coast, with the southern coast of the United States, and with the lives of the men aboard that oil rig. That disaster did not have to happen. And certainly the nuclear disaster in Japan has made us once again aware of the devastating harm that can come from a leaking nuclear power plant. Until we are 100% sure of the safety, we have no viable reason to take that kind of risk. We can save energy through conservation and efficiency. I'm told that as much as 1/3 of our energy is lost from where it is created to when it reaches your light bulb or where it's being used, and 1/3 is a lot. If we could tighten the grid and conserve and plug those leakage holes, that's what we need to do before we build another nuclear power plant or dig deeper and deeper into the ocean for oil. So 20 to 30 years ago, scientists said that we would have more and longer periods of hot weather due to global warming. Last summer, in Russia, people were dying due to the heat, never, ever experienced before. Scientists said that the droughts would be longer and there would be more forest fires. Australia just ended a 7-year drought, and after that, the continent spent most of its summer burning until the rains came recently, torrential downpours causing damaging floods. Scientists said that storms would be more severe, and I think we're seeing that all over the world. Russia was burning so vastly last year that 40% of its grain crop was destroyed, 40% of what they depend on for export, destroyed through fire. Scientists said that there would be much heavier rain and more severe flooding. 1/5 of the country of Pakistan was underwater, with thousands of lives lost. China had floods and unprecedented mudslides. These are the extreme weather conditions that we were told would happen. Not that climate change is causing heat, or causing rain, or causing flooding, but the warming planet is causing all of those things to be more severe. I have a child that lives in Bozeman, Montana. And last summer, again, it was around June, and she corrects me every time I do this, but I was telling people that they had golf ball size hail. They had tennis ball size hail that damaged their roofs, damaged their cars, and it's been devastating for them with insurance companies. And none of these conditions have ever been seen in recorded history. This is just the beginning of what's to come. There are lots of insurance companies that will no longer provide insurance for homes that are on the coast in some parts of the world. So what are we going to do? If the government won't protect us, and the oil and coal companies continue to gush carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for increased profit, who and what is going to motivate the change we need? Well, I couldn't be more delighted that we're here in a chapel, because I believe it's going to be people of faith. People of faith who see climate change and environmental degradation as a moral issue. Starting with becoming aware of the situation and making the changes that we want to see others make. Faith communities will lead. And then we'll vote for politicians who will represent and work for the best interests of the country over and above politics and political party lines. For people of faith, this challenge is probably our greatest one. It's a moral challenge that will decide our relationship with God, with each other, and the natural world. And the choices we make will decide the future for our children. If we love God, and we love what God created and loves, aren't we the ones to protect and cherish our world? If God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, aren't we obligated to take care of it? All nations and people are threatened by the changing climate, and we need to unite around this common cause, this climate crisis that we are all facing. Now, some people will wonder, what does this have to do with religion? And I hope that by the end of my talk, you will see that without a doubt, the climate crisis is anything else a religious issue. Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, all mainstream religions of the world have a responsibility to serve, to speak for the ones who cannot speak for themselves, which would include the next generation. We're called to love one another and to be the stewards of creation. And that's probably the most important reason for our involvement in energy and climate issues. I'm going to read you a quote that I found in an article on my way here. Climate change is the greatest human-induced crisis facing our world today. It's totally indiscriminate of race, culture, class, nationality, or religious belief. It affects every living organism on the planet, including us. And this is Nobel Prize winner Archbishop Desmond Tutu. It's in direct disobedience to the commandment to love one another that wealthy nations have, through their pollution, destroyed the very basic physical stability on which poor nations and communities depend. And this is important. It's the people who contribute the least to the problem who will suffer the most. It's a justice issue. So just stepping aside for a moment, most of us learn our values, our ethical outlook, early in our lives. And more often than not, those values come from religion, of whatever tradition that we or our families happen to belong to, the moral high ground, if you will, doing the right thing for the right reasons. So what does it say about us if we continue to do something that we know is harmful? Not just harmful to us, but harmful to people, animals, and the next generation who have no voice, but will suffer the consequences. We have to question our values. The poor, both here in the United States and around the world, are paying for mistakes that they had no knowledge of and they did not contribute to. This is an issue of human rights. It's where one group of people have prospered at the expense of another. So we need to restore a shared sense of purpose, because we all, rich or poor, and everyone in between, share this fragile planet, and we all need to share the responsibility for keeping it safe and healthy for every living thing, whether it's human or non-human, and certainly for the next generations. Now, there are solutions There are lots of solutions on the horizon. One of them is our grassroots Interfaith Power and Light campaign. We're promoting many of the solutions. And I hope that if any of you who are not students here, or even if you are and belong to a congregation that has not yet joined the New York Interfaith Power and Light program, that you'd consider getting in touch with them, and it can be found on the website. I don't see Jana. Jana, well, you are here. Jana runs the New York Interfaith Power and Light program, and you can speak with her later about the things that they're offering to congregations. Energy efficiency, conservation, and education. And we hope, too, that our campaign will have political influence. The political influence will be on a values-based message. We have over 10,000 congregations that are participating in the program in 37 states. So religious involvement will be, I believe, the moral influence that this movement needs, that we are the hope in dark times. Our generation has the opportunity to engage in a cultural revolution, and I spoke with some students today that if they hadn't figured out what their vocation was going to be when they graduate, we are on the edge of a cultural revolution, similar to the industrial one that was 200 years ago, but this time a clean one. The Gulf oil disaster is an example of humans taking great risk with nature, and it certainly makes a clear and powerful case for using less oil and getting ourselves onto clean, renewable energy. There has never been a solar spill. Prevention of those kinds of disasters is paramount, and we should never again take the risk of destroying so much of our southern coastline by not having the proper safety measures in place. 30 to 40% of the fish that we consume in this country come from the Gulf of Mexico. But another challenge is that the United States, more than any other country in the world, is divided over this issue. But whether or not you think that our warming global climate is human-induced, most people will agree that the solutions addressing climate change line up with the solutions that will save a broken economy. It will encourage investments, create jobs, increase national security, and you cannot argue with those goals. And when it's been made clear that renewable energy sources like solar and wind power generate 4 to 6 times as many jobs as coal plants, you can't help but wonder why we don't make the switch. Switching to a carbon-free energy will help rather than hurt the economy, and it's safer and cleaner. And this is the message that climate skeptics don't want you to hear, but it's a message that we all need to emphasize in times of economic uncertainty. So whether you believe in global warming or not, switching to a low-carbon economy is something that we should do anyway. Now, there are international treaties, which I'm sure you all know about, that have been going on now for many years, and as far as the United States is concerned, they have been a failure. But each time these international treaties on climate change happen, we move closer and closer to real solutions, and there has been some progress. Some of the good news is that for the first time, the United States, along with other countries, made commitments to provide $100 billion a year in funding to help developing nations adapt to the change in sea level rise and other threats that they face from the changing climate. China and India have become totally engaged in these conversations, and there is a rumor that China is about to announce its own targets for greenhouse gas reduction. More people from all around the world recognize that global climate change is a problem and we need to do something about it soon. Inaction now will only cost more later. Inaction now will only cost more later. The faith community has an important role. Major social changes in America have not happened without the moral voice of religion, and that voice is needed now. And I believe that it is the voice that will push and create real change. It's going to be the voice that brings us together with a shared purpose. The U.S. has also held a long and clear separation between church and state, but yet our democracy is best when all voices are heard in the political process. The moral responsibility to be good stewards of the earth fits side by side with our human desire to provide a safe and healthy world for our children. Those are shared values. So you don't have to believe that humans are warming the climate, not to recognize that reducing energy consumption and boosting renewable resources, energy supplies, is the single best prescription for lifting the U.S. economy, propelling a global economic recovery that's not based on exploitation and degradation of the environment, but rather based on smart, sustainable approaches that will democratize energy supplies, enrich regional communities and economies. I see the climate crisis as one of the most, if not the most, important moral issue of our time. When moral and economic priorities align as they do now, there's no justification for inaction. The world is looking to the United States for leadership, but we are falling behind. China is making major strides in developing a low-carbon economy and already has become the world's leader in clean, green technology. The best hope for all of civilization right now is that people of faith stand up and voice the moral responsibility of a nation to protect its people from potentially catastrophic disasters. And it is happening. Religions are not waiting for international treaties or for government regulation. We are putting our faith into action. And I'll give you an example. A year ago November, not this past November, but a year ago November, I was invited to go to Windsor Castle as the guest of Ban Ki-moon, who's the General Secretary of the United Nations, Prince Philip, you know who he is, and Martin Palmer, who runs something called ARC, which is the Alliance for Religion and Conservation. And those three people came together and invited religious leaders from all over the world to come to Windsor Castle, meet with Ban Ki-moon, and hand in a 3 to 5 year plan on what we plan to do to reduce our carbon emissions. Well, we did that, as did all these other different religions from around the world. And the notion was that Ban Ki-moon would take this book, which ended up being quite thick. He was going to take this, which he did, to Copenhagen to the international treaty. And the message was the religious community would like to have an international treaty on climate and greenhouse gas reductions. But whether or not you come to a consensus and have a treaty, we are moving ahead, and these are the things that we are going to do anyway. And it was a very powerful statement, and it was backed up that the Dow in China, just one of the commitments was that the Dow in China would put solar panels on every single one of their temples over the next 3 to 5 years. We committed to doubling our numbers, so we're hoping that we will soon have 20,000 congregations involved in our work. The Muslims are planting trees all around the world in different areas. So besides the religious community, there are other efforts and signs of hope. America's century-old love affair with the automobile might be a fading romance in that, and I don't have the numbers for 2010, but in 2009, there were more cars scrapped than purchased, and people are buying smaller, more efficient cars as well. The business case for protecting the climate is also so compelling that over 80 U.S. corporations and U.S. corporate leaders, including CEOs from companies like eBay, Virgin America, Pacific Gas and Electric, they all signed a joint letter and sent it to the administration calling on Congress to pass comprehensive climate and energy legislation. Some businesses are leaving the Chamber of Commerce because they disagree on their climate position. On the other side of the world, in India, the Delhi government has made a commitment to close its coal power plants. the dirtiest of the fossil fuels, over the next 4 years and replace them with cleaner burning natural gas power. But as far as I'm concerned, the most exciting and hopeful thing is that the faith community is now taking action. And we're not just talking about doing something. You can tell that from the Windsor story. The Interfaith Power and Light campaign is not waiting for our federal government, but acting on our own. I mentioned the Tao in China, and there are others. In Tanzania, there's a group of Lutherans who are replanting 3 million trees on Mount Kilimanjaro. Buddhists in Cambodia are trying to stop illegal logging, and they're ordaining their trees because it's people don't want to cut down a tree that has been ordained. And we are helping them. On our website, we have a program called Carbon Covenant, where we're helping these 4 different religious projects in the developing world to replant trees. And as you probably know, the forests, tropical forests, all forests are carbon sinks. They can absorb the carbon dioxide, and trees are very important to our survival and to countering the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But here in the United States, these 10,000 plus congregations that are part of the Interfaith Power and Light movement are doing things like putting solar panels on their roofs, putting in geothermal systems, installing energy-efficient appliances, developing creative liturgy, which will help change both hearts and minds. Churches, mosques, and synagogues are serving as examples to the community. Clergy are walking the halls of legislative buildings and talking to lawmakers. This is what they did during the civil rights movement. And many people credit the faith community with playing a decisive role in that successful effort to convince politicians to do the moral and right thing that supports the common good. And climate change doesn't have to be about gloom and doom. Reducing consumption of fossil fuels, such as gasoline, can be good for your health. Walking and biking for short errands not only allow you to cut your carbon footprint, but it'll help shrink America's collective waistline by increasing exercise. Getting out of motor vehicles can help you develop a deeper connection to God's creation, closer to the birds, closer to the flowers, and other natural beauty. And it isn't about sacrifice. It's about stewardship. It can be joyful, the joy of giving. When I go in my garden after a meal and I dump food scraps from the table into my compost bin, and then I dig it back up a few months later and I use that soil to plant vegetables in, or if I walk the 2 miles over to Grace Cathedral on a Sunday, I feel like I'm giving back in exchange for the abundance that I and many of you have been blessed with. I don't feel deprived or like I'm a martyr or making some profound sacrifice. It's quite the contrary. I feel good about not making waste, about being able to use the soil from the compost, about saving gasoline for when I really need it. And it's fun to experiment with ways to save energy and not waste so much. But doing the right thing is not always the easiest. But for people of conscience, it's the only thing to do. Recently, I was asked by one of our Interfaith Power and Light startup state if they could leave the words climate change and global warming out of their mission statement. And the rationale was that they are in a red state. They are working with people who have not yet accepted global warming as an issue, but people who listen to Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck, and they are agreeing with the politicians that are heavily funded by the oil and gas industry. It was a state, they say, a state full of skeptics, and that their religious partners, including many evangelicals, might be just turned away if they talk about climate. Well, you might guess how I responded, and our national office did. We said, no, if you don't mention climate as the reason that you're promoting energy efficiency, conservation, and green technology, you won't fit into our affiliated network. Climate change is why we're doing what we're doing. There are utilities, conservation companies, energy companies, who are doing the same thing, but our uniqueness is that this is a religious issue. It's not a partisan political issue, but rather a responsibility that we have as a species to protect each other. And it is, or it should be, for all Americans, an American value, loving our neighbors. And furthermore, I really believe that you cannot solve a problem if you can't name it. And the climate crisis is real. 97% of the world's best climate scientists have agreed, and you just cannot argue with that. Now, I'm not a scientist, as I'm sure you well know, but for the last 10 years, I've worked almost exclusively on a religious response to global warming. I have read about it and studied it. I have met and sat down with scientists. I believe them. I think they are today's prophets. If you're a skeptic, I suggest that you read or listen to a climate scientist, not a biologist, not a physicist, but a climate scientist who has peer-reviewed material. Lots of biologists, physicists, and all kinds of scientists recognize it as a problem. But the people who have the real information are climate scientists, and if their information has been peer-reviewed, you will find that the evidence is overwhelming, and that the deniers are either paid by the fossil fuel industry or just not wanting to change because this is Al Gore's issue. But change is good for us. Look at social networking that's going on now. Innovation, research, new technology, all on the horizon. And one of my strongest arguments when talking to skeptics is, what if they're wrong? If I'm wrong, and we have cleaned the air, and we've cut down on lots of pollution, we've created jobs, and we've boosted the economy. Those are good things. If the deniers are wrong, they will have condemned our children to an unhealthy and miserable future. And think of this. If the abolitionists had backed down because plantation owners in the South didn't like the sound of the message, we might still have slaves. So for those of us who recognize the climate crisis, this is our time to speak out. And for religious leaders, we have an obligation to speak out. Science tells us we have but a few scant years to turn this trend around in order to avoid catastrophic weather conditions, unprecedented sea rise, and putting entire nations in the developing world at risk. There are some scientists who say it's already too late. Therefore, we have to work together to curb our energy use in order to slash these greenhouse gases, to limit carbon dioxide, and that's the most serious and prevalent greenhouse gas. We need everybody working together. No one segment of society can do this alone. This is our shared purpose, and we have a responsibility to turn things around. Now, you might think moral obligation would compel the United States to act, and that is a message that we need to share. But the message that works often more than moral responsibility to convince the rest of society is to talk about the economic benefits that will flow to society. If we consume less energy and we shift to a more sustainable, non-polluting, renewable fuels, we will be safer and healthier. We'll put people back to work and we'll bring manufacturing home. It's time to look for solutions to save the entire community of life. It isn't one species, one disease, or one problem. It's about the well-being of the entire communion of life. And I think that clergy preaching from the pulpit about the moral basis behind environmental stewardship may have far more of an impact than a scientist, and certainly more than a politician. What kind of a society continues to do things that we know are destructive? And what does that say about us as humans? What does it mean to be human in light of the climate crisis that we're experiencing? And when we know what the problem is, and we know many of the solutions, and yet we don't do anything, then don't our ethical and moral values have to be questioned? So what does it say about these elected officials when they continue to avoid doing anything about this immense challenge? And isn't it a crime not to even try to protect us? And the U.S. government is letting China take over world leadership in renewable energy. Our politicians seem to care more about their personal power than the power of America in the world. The decisions that we make today will affect neighbors near and far, and most importantly, our future neighbors, our children and their children. And we have a responsibility to the next generation. We also have a responsibility to answer this call for greater economic opportunity. So isn't it strange, I'll ask some of you adults in the room, that we often spend our entire lifetime trying to leave wealth in all kinds of forms for our children, whether it's jewelry or land or stock portfolios, but we never seem to think about leaving them clean air or clean water or an atmosphere that supports life as we know it. So how do our children survive? And some people think, well, they'll figure it out, but I think that's irresponsible. But I refuse to believe that we're so lacking in moral integrity that we don't care. If I thought that we couldn't do something or that we didn't care about the climate problem, I would not have dedicated my ministry and my life to this effort. And I wouldn't have any hope. Without hope, I wouldn't be here. My reasons for hope were growing thin after the November election. And then I was invited to visit a school in Massachusetts, and it was in February. And they've given me a really new full tank of energy with a kind of we can do this attitude, coming from young, smart students, some of whom I met again today. Their teachers get it, and they get it. One class assignment was given by the science teacher was to find a skeptic. Just go on the internet and find a climate denier or a climate skeptic. Actually, there's quite a difference between the skeptic, because all scientists are skeptics, but climate deniers. Find a climate denier and do research on that person. And the kids came back into the classroom and had discovered a tremendous amount. And the main thing was that the deniers were in some way, shape, or form connected to the oil and gas industry. And they're learning to think for themselves, and I think we're reaching a threshold where there are enough people who are aware of the daunting issue that we face. 85% of the American people who have been polled on this issue say that they care. It is not a high priority as yet, but they do say they care. And 65% of Americans attend a house of worship on a regular basis. So we as religious leaders have a really large audience and a lot of influence. I think the human race is evolving. I think our collective consciousness is evolving, and that we are and we will continue to develop a shared purpose and common goals with people all over the world, a great awakening. I think we've begun to realize that environmental values have a larger ethical dimension, and the realization that we are one, we have to work together towards that truth, the truth that we are one shared human purpose, one earth, one atmosphere, and one global climate. There comes a time when we have to make choices, and they hit you at unexpected times, and often more than once before we really ingest the need for change. But when that epiphany happens, there's no going back. Better choices will come forward with ease, and many of us have come to that moment. Others are still discerning, but we're all on a path to regeneration. We have to choose whether to live for ourselves alone, as we have in the past, or for our neighbors and those who come after us. We have a choice between life and death. It is just that serious. This is the moment when we must take responsibility for the destruction that humans have visited on creation. It's the moment when we need to pledge to take an unwavering stand to preserve and protect the creation over which we were given dominion, not exploitation, not domination, dominion, love, kindness, stewardship, generosity, and care. If we choose life, then we choose to live in harmony with one another and all creation. It's the time to start making better choices, time to redefine what it means to be human, and to seek justice on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves. It's a time for a generational shared purpose, one that will bring us out of recession and start healing the abused earth. Now, faith and hope are crucial to celebrating a shared purpose. And I really sense hopefulness all around us. Hope is around in the form of new technologies, investments in renewable energy, and in the students that I have seen over the last 6 months. Most of all, the recognition of people of faith who believe in the power of the human spirit. And hope is here in this room with you. And I hope that we will commit to finding and holding joy as we move forward in a peaceful campaign, one that brings healing to this fragile earth, our island home. We have a great opportunity now. And while the climate crisis is a major crisis, crisis is usually associated with some sort of danger. But crisis also brings opportunity, and we cannot waste this opportunity. We can run from the danger, we can face it and move forward together, unified with a shared purpose. There is unlimited and sustainable economic growth beckoning on the horizon with these new technologies to be researched and developed to create millions of new clean energy jobs. We have the tools, and I pray that we have the will to make things right. It's time to put our faith into action and hope, keep hope in a shared purpose with a healthy future. So let's all commit to a regeneration of spirit, both inwardly and outwardly. Commit to being an example to others and show our love for creation in all our behaviors. Choose resurrection and life over death and destruction. We're all in this together. One family, one shared purpose, and one hope for all. We're here, the time is now, and I thank you very much for your attention. And unless I've gone too long, I think we can take a few questions, or actually turn it into a discussion. It's probably a small enough group that we can